Okay, so this presentation is on leading thriving teams of intergenerational volunteers. It was a topic that came up yesterday, and we're going to get into it in some more depth now. Intergenerational volunteers bring together diverse perspectives, skills, and experiences, creating a dynamic and inclusive approach to volunteerism. You know this, the collaboration between different age groups fosters mutual learning where younger volunteers benefit from the wisdom and experience of older generations, and older volunteers gain fresh insights and tech skills from younger participants. And by leveraging the strengths of all generations, these teams drive meaningful impact and long-term sustainability in volunteer initiatives. Before I introduce our speaker, we're going to do a quick poll on Slido, just to find out what the generational mix is like here today. Again, we can't see who's putting what. So open Slido, and of course online. Welcome back from the break online. Hope you got up and went for a bit of a walk, didn't just sort of sit at your computer there. So this is you. Where do you sit generationally? Millennial, Boomer, Gen Z or Gen Z, the builder generation. I'm tempted to say something terrible like the boomers are suddenly going to go like that. It's taking them a while to work out how to use the poll, but I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. I know. I'm offended. Oh, I was joking. All right. Well, there's no best generation, but go Gen X. Okay. So almost half of the room and online Gen X. That's great. When you're speaking to an audience, it's critical to know who is actually your audience, and so that's very, very useful. 48% Gen X. All right, so with that in mind, it's my pleasure to introduce Ashley Fell to deliver this presentation. Ashley is a social researcher, TEDx speaker, and the Director of Advisory at McCrindle. She's the author of 2 books on leadership and generational insights titled Work, Wellbeing, and Generation Alpha. She's also the host of McCrindle's podcast, The Future Report. In addition to delivering keynotes at conferences, Ashley is booked to conduct training days, facilitate panels, and deliver workshops across an array of industries, from generational change to the impact of technology, from key demographic transformations to social trends. Ashley is here to share research-based analysis of global megatrends. Please welcome Ashley Fell.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Well, good morning, everyone. It's such a delight to be joining you today. As mentioned, my name is Ashley Fell, and I am delighted to be representing an organisation called McCrindle to share with you some of our latest insights and research and predictions around the future and leading intergenerational teams, particularly from a volunteering and not-for-profit perspective. So I'm excited to be here. I love working with the not-for-profit sector. We get to run this kind of big national study every year about how Australians are engaging with charities and volunteering. So I've got some new data to share with you today, so I'm very excited. But before we get into that, I thought I would begin by giving you a brief introduction to who we are at McCrindle. So we're a social research company, sometimes kind of called demographers or market research. I do host a podcast called The Future Report, and sometimes I'm introduced as a futurist, and people say, what is a futurist? How do you do that? Do you pluck trends out of the air? And I say, no, this next slide is a far more accurate depiction of who we are and what we love. Honestly, we're a bunch of researchers at heart, and we love data, we love Excel, we love the ABS, and we spend a lot of time looking at the ABS, and I promise you there's no greater or more exciting event for us in our calendar Then the release of the census results. You're thinking, oh, that survey we have to fill in, but we're like, oh, a once in a 5-year snapshot of the whole nation that's so rare and so exciting, updates all of our data and our clients' data and everything. And you might recall back a couple of years ago, a couple of Olympic Games ago, when Ariane Titmus broke the world record and her coach was celebrating. That's how we feel when the new data comes out. That's the only kind of elation. It's kind of a demographer's day, so very excited to share some research with you from the census, yes, but also from some other studies that we've done. But before we look at the future and where things are going, it is, I guess, in some ways poetic and I think helpful to look back and to just appreciate the context that has shaped all of us alive today, but particularly these emerging generations in their formative years, from societal events, political, demographic, economic. And the way that I like to do that in a conference setting in a really kind of quick, fun way is to look at the Oxford English Dictionary's word of the year that they deemed to summarise the year that was. And in about 2 minutes, we'll see some of the defining technologies and events that have happened and have shaped the last decade and a half. So if you cast your mind back to the year 2011, the word of the year that year was app. Prior to that, prior to 2011, we weren't using and talking about the applications on our devices that kind of met our every need. In 2012, the word of the year was cloud. Not the clouds in the sky, but the cloud that we or the kind of vague, ambiguous cloud we upload all of our insights and data to. In 2013, it wasn't even a word, the word of the year, but it was a symbol, particularly the hashtag symbol, the era of Twitter gaining a lot of traction. In 2014, I like to say not much must have happened in society because the word of the year was selfie. So it must have been a pretty relaxed year in the world. But in 2015, maybe even more so, because the word of the year wasn't even a word but an emoji, specifically the face with tears of joy, which I have on good authority that Gen Z, our younger demographic, they're not using this emoji anymore. They're using the skull emoji now. This is so funny, I'm dead. So just a hot tip, if you've got any Gen Zs in the family WhatsApp and you put a skull emoji, they'll be like, how do you know that we use that and what that means? But in 2016, we start to see a little bit of a shift in terms of what's going on in the world, because in 2016, the word of the year was post-truth. In 2017, it was fake news. In 2018, it was toxic, which can be, I guess, applied to the context of the environment, and renewed focus on climate change, sustainability can also be applied in the context of toxic masculinity, because we had the Me Too movement gaining a lot of traction at that time. In 2019, the word or the phrase of the year was deemed to be climate emergency. You might recall we had that really bad bushfire season here that year, and the United States had a pretty horrendous one as well. And I wonder what word you're thinking they assigned for 2020. If you're thinking something pandemic related, you would actually only be half correct, because in an unprecedented move, the Oxford English Dictionaries couldn't choose just one word for that iconic year and that start to the decade of the 2020s. They had to choose a range of words. Now, of course, words about the pandemic made it into the list, but also bushfire, impeachment, Black Lives Matter, and cancel culture all made it into the list. So pretty iconic start to this decade that we're in now. In 2021, the word of the year was simply vax, to describe our collective response, and that sort of even colloquial term on the word vaccine that we were kind of all talking about and debating about. In 2022, they let the public vote on the word of the year, and the public voted in goblin mode, which, if you haven't heard of that before, it means to be unapologetically lazy or slovenly. My personal social researcher take on it is maybe after those years of lockdowns, which had their own set of challenges, but some benefits as well in terms of everyone out in the park, and it was very wholesome. We were all walking dogs and seeing neighbours, and we weren't flying everywhere, and we had a bit more maybe equilibrium and well-being. And then we filled our lives up again once we were vaxxed, and maybe people are like, oh, I'm just really tired and a bit burnt out after filling life up again after that sort of collective pause. So that's my hypothesis, but I did see one parent weigh in on this, and they said, pretty sure goblin mode is just a new term to describe the state that teenagers are always in. So perhaps if you're a parent or you have been a parent to a teenager, then you might be able to empathise with that. In 2023, it was interesting to see that the Oxford English Dictionary chose Riz as the word of 2023, Gen Z slang for charisma. So they're really leaning into the younger generations and the slang and their influence. But in 2024, at the end of last year, it was quite interesting to see, as it always is for us, to see what word they elect. And it was interesting to see them choose brain rot as the word of the year or the phrase of the year for 2024. Another sort of term that kind of can be used as a synonym for that is doom scrolling. So the idea that we're spending more time on our devices, we're kind of scrolling our feeds on social media, whether that be Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or Snapchat or whatever it might be, we're spending a lot more time on technology. So I think even just looking at those words of the year gives us a little bit of an interesting overview of the last decade and a half and some of the contextual factors that are at play as we now think about the future and particularly engaging a diverse range of generations in the volunteering context. Now, even for me, as someone who spends their time, literally the day job, researching change, I will admit to you that on occasion I find myself identifying with Simon here, who said, don't know about y'all, but I could really go for some precedented times. Because there's been a lot of change to have to understand, and if you're a leader in your organisation, or even in your family, or whatever context you can apply that to, people are looking to you to guide them through some of these big changes, from technology to demographics to generational change. And I find it helpful as well just to acknowledge that not everyone loves change. And as human beings, sometimes we resist it. And it's easy to have what we call change fatigue, whereby you might acknowledge that the world around you is changing rapidly, but you're a bit fatigued by that need to respond to it. Kind of like this grandparent here who had a problem of too many buttons on the remote control. Now, I commend the innovation. I do. I commend the innovation displayed here by this young Gen Z or Gen Alpha. Bit of masking tape. We'll fix that right up. You've probably seen the new remote controls now. It's like maximum 4 buttons. It's very easy and simple. But this is one common response that I don't think thriving leaders or thriving organizations can afford to have for too long, that kind of makeshift temporary solution, the Band-Aid solution, if you will. The second common response that we see to change is similar to change fatigue, and we call it change apathy, whereby, again, you might acknowledge that the world around you is changing, but you're a bit apathetic towards that need to respond to it. Kind of like this line writer here who saw something happening in their external environment and just thought, no, I might just continue to do things the way that I've always done them, the way that I know how, the way I'm comfortable with. I can't be bothered to deal with that trend over there, you know? And I understand change does take a fair bit from us to respond to, but we do believe that it's really imperative for organisations to have an understanding of what the changes are that are impacting the future so that you can lead your organisations towards and into that future. And that's where, as futurists, we don't just pluck trends out of the air or look at one trend in isolation. Our strategy is to look at lots of different trends, and some of them you can see here on the screen, and what we would do is group these into themes and call them mega trends. And the main areas we look at are demographics, economics, generational, social, technological, occasionally political as well, and you can kind of group them and think, okay, what's going on in these spheres today that will impact and change how we engage with our volunteers, with our donors, with our communities in the future. And a big one, of course, in understanding change, we believe, is the generational landscape. And we saw earlier, it was great to see which generations, mix of generations we have in the room today. There's always slightly different ways that you can define the generations. Unfortunately, there's no kind of global authority on generational labels. That would make it a lot easier. But you can see here the 7 generations we have in our communities today are at the oldest end. We've got our builders generation, aged 80 years and over in 2025, followed by the baby boomers aged between 61 and 79. Then we have Gen X, aged in their 40s and 50s. We've got the Gen Ys, aged in their 30s and 40s. And just a note on the Gen Ys, if you ever hear the term millennial used, that's basically a synonym for Gen Y. I belong to this generation, and I will admit to you that I do miss the days when millennial meant young person. Sadly, it doesn't mean that anymore. It used to just be this collective label for the young people. But Gen Z came out in force a couple of years ago and said, stop calling us millennials. Millennials are off having kids, and in the next life stage, the Gen Zs are the new and the exciting younger demographic, although the oldest of them this year are turning 30. So they're not that young. They will start to become this emerging generation of parents as well. Really, the key younger demographic we have today is Generation Alpha, aged 15 years and under, but in an exciting new development in 2025, we have a new generation being born in Generation Beta. Now, Mark McCrindle, who's our founder and principal, is credited with naming Generation Alpha. It's a very random claim to fame, but it gives us a lot of cool opportunities to talk about them and research them, and he and I co-authored a book about them a couple of years ago. And the story behind that name is over a decade ago, probably around 2007-ish, he realized that Gen Z were kind of almost nearing the end, and he thought there's no clear next letter to assign to them after X, Y, Z. And so he ran a survey of Australians and he said, what do you think the next generation should be called? A lot of people said Gen A, right? We'll just go back to the beginning. But he thought maybe we can get a bit more creative, and instead of kind of going back to the old, this is the first generation entirely born in the 21st century. So he thought, let's move to the Greek alphabet to signify this whole new generation. And so it seems to have kind of been widely accepted, which is cool, although had a lot of media attention about Gen Beta this year because they're being born. And some people are like, what a terrible name for a generation, because people think Beta's second kind of best. But in the scientific context, Beta in that sort of world is kind of an improvement on the next, the one before. So we take a really positive view of that label, but we'll see who debates it and what other terms might come about. But these are our generations today, and it's really easy, I think, for those of us who belong to, say, an older generation to discount some of the younger people and go, why are they always looking at their phones? Why are they addicted to their devices? And I love this quote from George Orwell, who said, every generation imagines itself to be more intelligent than the one that went before and wiser than the one that comes after it. And I think it's helpful sometimes to check ourselves and go, how do we feel about people of other generations? Do we think ours is the peak generation? Or are we open to learning, and are we humble and curious about the difference? And I think what's really helpful is to understand and appreciate that difference, you need to understand and appreciate that every generation has been shaped in a different context. And that's why we're all different, and that's why the way we are, or part of the reason why we are the way we are. And I love this slide because what it does is it looks at how various aspects of life, particularly work, have differed across the generations. And so when you get baby boomers who have been shaped in an era with autocratic and authoritarian leadership styles and hierarchical, applying that directive leadership to younger generations who are looking for and have been shaped in a more empowering sort of era, you get friction. In the same way that when we try and use communication styles from previous generations and decades ago that have evolved, we get some friction. You can see here even how at one point the fax machine was new and exciting and amazing, and now we've evolved and technology has evolved since then. And even in terms of work location, from previous generations who were raised and taught and shaped in an era where the work was done in the workplace towards today an expectation of flexibility and remote and hybrid. And oftentimes I talk to people and there is this expectation from younger people around work from home, but for older generations they view that as a real privilege. So privilege compared to expectation, you can understand where some of these challenges come. And particularly another area that's not on this particular slide, but that I know in which case the generations are different, is the language they use or the slang that younger people use today. You might have heard some of these slang terms in terms of when two Gen Zs are conversing between each other, you might hear them say, "Bae, my new work gig is legit. The hours are savage, YOLO." Now, this is English, I can assure you, and I'll decrypt it for us. BAE is an acronym from a few years back. It stands for before anyone else, so it can be their significant other or best friend, boyfriend, girlfriend. My new work gig, their new job is legit, it's legitimate, it's current, it's happening now. The hours are savage, so the hours must be intense. And then YOLO stands for? You only live once, well done. That reminds me of another acronym not really used by Gen Z, but about Gen Z, which is FOMO, fear of missing out in this hyper-connected world they live in. And that reminds me of the adult iteration. I'm not sure if you've heard of JOMO, the joy of missing out. If anyone else is in that life stage where you're like, a night in on the couch, absolutely, would love that. But something you might hear in response to this from another Gen Z, Yas queen, slay girl, goat. So some real female empowerment going on here. Yas and excited, yes. Queen, someone at the top of their game. Slay is to kill it, but it's always used in a very positive context. I remember recently I walked into the office with my hair up in like a different hairstyle, and one of the Gen Zs was like, slay, and I was like, oh, thank you. Like, you just remember, if you hear that term, it's always very positive and very encouraging. And goat, borrowed from the sporting context, greatest of all time. So I think it's important, if we're expected to motivate, lead, inspire these younger volunteers, then it's crucial to understand, or try and understand at least, what they're talking about and what they're saying. Although I will admit sometimes Gen Z do take a while to get to the point, because all this conversation really entails is, I like my job, great. But nonetheless, I think it's relevant for us to appreciate the slang, and every generation's had their slang. Previous generations were saying things like groovy, and that's rad, and a few decades ago, we'd be sitting in this conference going, oh, those younger generations, why are they talking this way? And so it always evolves, it always changes, and we'll be expectantly waiting to see what some of that Gen Alpha slang is. You might have heard the skibbity Ohio Riz type language. That's the Gen Alphas coming through now. So there'll definitely be ones to watch in the coming years. But I think as we think about a workforce perspective, and you could probably apply this to the volunteering sector as well, even thinking about the people we have in the room today, you can see there is a real kind of mix of generations in the workforce today between largely Gen X, majority millennials, but 27% of the workforce is already comprised of Gen Z. And as we project and look at 2035, so about a decade's time, we'll see Generation Alpha really coming through as well. And we'll start to see that over the next even 5 years as they move into part-time work and maybe work at the local fast food store at 14 and 9 months, and you might be served by a Gen Alpha. So our workforce, our volunteer sort of pool is changing and evolving. And we ran this really interesting study last year about the different generations, particularly when it comes to work. And we asked this question, how important do you think the following are to the future of work? And you can see here the top response was learning to work effectively with people of different generations above, and it just beat out some of these other areas, which are still really important around leadership, adaptability to navigate the changing world of work, flexibility, and even self-awareness and self-management. So people are identifying that working with other people of different generations, as people live longer, they work later, we're going to have more generations mixing, and so understanding these generations is really key. So what I wanted to do now is just spend a couple of minutes looking at the characteristics of volunteers. And I think these characteristics can apply across the board, but probably we're starting to see are a bit more kind of prevalent in our younger volunteer base. And so the first characteristic I would assign to our changing volunteer base is that people are increasingly digital. Now, I don't know how you feel personally about technology and how it's pacing, or even artificial intelligence. Maybe you're a little bit skeptical. If you are, I thought I would share with you a conversation that someone had in their household that I thought you might be able to empathize with. It went like this. They said, my husband asked me why I spoke so softly in the house. And I said I was afraid Mark Zuckerberg was listening. And then he laughed, and I laughed, and Alexa laughed, and Siri laughed. Now, this is not a true story. And I'm not sharing it to exacerbate anyone's fear, or I actually think a healthy level of skepticism is good when we're looking at AI and technology and where things are going. But I share it rather to empathize with, because it's really easy for those of us who are a bit older to have this distrust and kind of skepticism or resistance towards technology and the use of it. But for younger generations, they don't view it in the same lens. And you might even see scenes like this out and about in your communities, just this young Gen Alpha expecting this magazine to be a touchscreen. They're like, what's wrong with this iPad? Why isn't it working? And so they've been shaped in a different era with different technologies, and it's kind of summarized across all generations with this quote, which I love, from one of our books, where we said, the age at which we're exposed to a new technology or transformative event determines how embedded it will be in our psyche and in our lifestyle. If you think about Gen Alpha, they began being born in 2010. That was the same year the iPad launched. So they will not know a world without the iPad. Many of them won't know a world without Alexa or Siri. There were so many stories when we were running focus groups for our Gen Alpha book of parents saying, oh yeah, my 5-year-old is talking to Alexa all the time. Play Bluey, play Peppa Pig, what's the weather going to be like today? All these questions, and they're growing up in households with these personal assistants, and that's so different to the world that might have shaped you or I. And so understanding that's really key, but I would also argue that all of us are digital. It's not just these younger generations. I mean, I'm sure you can relate to this slide in terms of what we fear. I think if you'd asked someone living in Australia maybe a decade and a half ago, what are your 3 biggest fears? The international perception of us anyway is that we would have said snakes, spiders and heights. But I don't think we fear these things anymore as much as we fear symbols, particularly this one. When you see the low Wi-Fi symbol on the device, I don't think it matters what generation you are, you're kind of getting a bit worried. But beyond that, maybe when you see this one appear and you've got to wait for something to load, or if you're working on an Apple sort of device, maybe you're wondering whether everything is lost. But the scariest symbol of them all, by far, would have to be this one, whereby all forms of connectivity cease to exist. And I remember kind of making this point about how reliant we are on technology pre-pandemic. But I feel like what COVID did is it really exacerbated kind of the path we were on, because for especially those few years, we needed these devices to go to school, to go to work, to do so much of life when we had to isolate. And we've taken some of that, I think, into this sort of post-pandemic world that we live in now. And so understanding how different generations are engaging with technology and using it is really key. One of the biggest challenges, though, we've seen in our research does come through even the different communication styles that each generation kind of applies. And you can see here that's above expectations of work ethic, different approaches to conflict resolution, technical proficiency, and workplace flexibility. So understanding and creating kind of a unified approach to technology, I think, is going to be really important when we're thinking about engaging with volunteers now and into the future. And to get you thinking like a futurist, I love this next slide, because what it does is it forces us all to think about what life will be like in, say, 5 or 10 years' time. Our prediction is that a young person, a school leaver today, will probably never own a pure fax machine, a landline phone, or a kind of pure GPS system. I heard a great story about the GPS recently. It was a parent in the car with their Gen Alpha child, and the child said, "Mum, you were alive before phones, right?" And she said, "Yep." And they said, "Oh, well, how did you know where to go in the car? Like, without Apple Maps or Google Maps, like, how did you know?" They were genuinely curious. And the mother said, "Well, we had books that lived in the car called street directories, and there were books full of maps, and you'd get it out and you'd navigate to where you had to go." And the child thought about that for a second, and they said, "Like a pirate?" And so that era doesn't feel like it was that long ago, but it's a world away from what we all use today, and from kind of incomprehensible for a child to navigate and to think about using a physical map with directions on it. So we're kind of moving to a more digital era, and even if we continue down this pathway of digital and contactless payments, we might not see as many credit cards in the future, or even wallets being bought by younger people, and maybe even the analog watch could be more of a fashion statement than a time-telling device. And you might disagree on some of these things. You might be a real analog watch stan. I have met a few people at conferences who are like, "No, the analog watch is here to stay, it's crucial." But I think with the exception of a couple of key industries, most of us can agree the fax machine has kind of had its day. Now, this was highlighted to me, these kind of different generations being shaped by different technologies was highlighted to me in a conversation that took place between two people in a work setting, where the older employee said to their younger counterpart, "Could you fax over a copy of this document?" And the younger employee replied, "No, I'm so sorry, I can't fax because of where I live." And the older employee thought, "That's an odd response. Where do you live?" And the younger employee replied, "The 21st century." So, bit of a sassy younger generation coming through at times, but a different century that has shaped them, that's true. So different technologies, different attitudes. I think it can be easy for us to have different perspectives on technology, but that doesn't change the fact that we're moving towards a more digitally integrated future. So that's the first characteristic of volunteers today. The second is that people today, in a workplace context and a volunteering context, are more mobile than ever before. Part of that comes in the application of work and work from home. We can shop on our mobile devices. We can do things from anywhere pretty much these days. And on the work kind of front, I wonder if you had to work from home in the last 5 years. If you did, you might have had children at home, and I heard that was a bit tough in terms of when you had different generations working and studying at home. Now, I'm not endorsing any of the creative solutions on this slide in terms of trying to focus and concentrate. But there were some challenges around work from home, and on a much more serious note, the biggest challenge that every study we ran around this came back saying, the biggest challenge with work from home or remote work is social isolation. And how much I think many of us didn't realize how much we relied on work for social interaction and connection and community and friendship and banter, not just I go there to get paid and I come home. Sometimes work can be like that, but for many of us it's more than that. And so there were some struggles, but of course there's a lot of benefits as well that come with working remotely and work from home, not to kind of withstand even when you have those days where you don't have any kind of online meetings, and you can be in that goblin mode kind of environment. So there's definitely some challenges and some benefits. The biggest benefit was the time savings from the research. People said, I don't have to commute, I don't have to get ready, I've got more time in my day, and so there was definitely some benefits. So we're mobile in that regard, but we're also mobile, and particularly younger people are more mobile today in terms of the careers they'll have as well. You and I might have gone from school into further study into our chosen profession, whereas the career trajectory of a young person today looks a little bit more like this. There's more options available to them than ever before. And based on the average tenure of someone staying in one job for around 3 years, our prediction is that a school leaver today will have 18 jobs across 6 careers in their lifetime. So moving jobs a lot more frequently. The only thing they're not moving more frequently, it seems, is out of the family home. Now, I don't know if anyone here is a parent to anyone in their, let's say, late 20s, maybe early 30s. They haven't flown the nest as soon as you might have done. And that's why they've been labelled a generation of kippers, which does stand for kids in parents' pockets eroding retirement savings. So a big shout out to anyone giving a helping hand to the younger demographic. It's tough out there in the current economy and house prices and rent, so it's having some big impacts, but that's a bit on the mobility of our volunteers and their life stages. And the third kind of characteristic I wanted to talk about is that people today across different contexts, including the volunteer and not-for-profit sector, people are increasingly visual. Now, we have this saying, the number one search engine is no longer Google, it's YouTube, because why would you read something when you can watch a video about it? Now we've got TikTok coming in and kind of evolving that game again, and we asked this really interesting question in one of our surveys last year. We said, where are you turning to on a daily basis? Not just to doom scroll or be entertained, but to teach yourself something new. And you can see here that 1 in 2 Gen Zs are turning to TikTok daily to teach themselves a new skill. And when the content is true and there's no element of fake news, that's really cool, but there's also some challenges that might come with that as well. For every other generation, it's websites. But as we look at the top 3 across every generation, we do see social media coming through, and the only common thread among all generations is YouTube. And what that tells me is that every generation would probably prefer to watch a video about something or read a visualized summary of something rather than sit through a 60-page heavy kind of text document. Even for me at this conference, I've got about 90 slides to share with you today. Don't worry, we're past the halfway mark, I assure you, but for people in the whole death by PowerPoint, people go, 90 slides, are you joking? But it's visual, it's fast-paced, it's storytelling. I think that death by PowerPoint sometimes, or anything really, is when it's really arduous and it's really text-heavy and you've got to concentrate really hard and you've got the ultimate distraction device in your pocket where you can check emails or check social media. So making sure that our communication, our insights, our messaging is visual is really key. The other aspect I wanted to share with you as well is this interesting aspect where younger generations particularly are also turning to podcasts on a daily basis to teach themselves something new, and also the role of social media influencers is playing a big part. So keeping that in mind as well as you think about engaging and marketing your services or your volunteer opportunities to younger generations, I think will be really helpful. And so, in light of these characteristics, in light of the trends we've looked at, I wanted to sort of end our time together and the presentation today just on a couple of key considerations for leaders. This is really focused and honed in the not-for-profit sector, and this is from one of our big sort of national studies, which I'll share a link to at the end if you're interested in diving deeper into some of those insights. But the first kind of takeaway from our research with regards to the not-for-profit sector is to amplify your cause. Now, this slide here, this graph, shows you the causes that Australians, according to our survey data, are most motivated to give to and how that's changed over time. And you can see here some key spikes, even disaster response, when we do have those big national sort of natural disasters, bushfires, floods, cyclones, you do get those peak in volunteering, in giving to those causes. But what we're seeing as well is that especially as we look at younger generations who are the future sort of donor and volunteer, is that they're not really exhibiting as much loyalty to particular charities and not-for-profits. And the cause tends to matter more to them than the familiarity of the organisation or the charity. And so you can see here the cause or area of need matters more to Australians today than the familiarity and reputation of the charity or not-for-profit. And so one of the key takeaways we found in our research is that loyalty is not to the institution, but to the cause itself. And so amplifying your cause is kind of the first key consideration. The second is, of course, to understand your unique volunteer base. And part of that comes from understanding the generations and their different giving behaviours, which we've sort of explored a little bit. But this slide shows you a bit more nuance here. So whenever we run studies about Australians donating or volunteering, we always see older generations exhibiting greater sort of loyalty to certain not-for-profits and charities. They're also donating more financially, but younger generations, I think the lure is to think, well, younger generations aren't engaged with not-for-profits, but that's not the case. They're engaged in different ways. And you can see here, they're more likely to advocate and raise awareness for a specific issue than older generations. They're more likely to fundraise or promote a specific charity. They're also more likely to volunteer as well. So they're giving of their time. They don't have as much money just as a generation. We know that the baby boomers, there's an incredible statistic, the baby boomers comprise just around a quarter of the population. They own more than half the nation's private wealth as a generation. So they're able to give from a bigger pool. They're able to engage with not-for-profits in different ways, whereas younger generations are more likely to engage in all these other ways. And so every generation has a role to play in volunteering, in engagement, in serving. And this new wave of volunteering we are seeing coming through, where 48% of volunteers say that they dedicate their time to organisations they support at least once a month. So understanding how you can do that. Contrary to the slide before, when we asked about propensity to volunteer, we are seeing younger generations saying they volunteer more. However, baby boomers are more likely to volunteer at least weekly. So you do get this regular proportion of a smaller portion, if that makes sense, of baby boomers who, again, are exhibiting that loyalty. So thinking about future generations, but honouring the great service of older generations, I think, is also that tension. We also saw from our study that a third of donors have increased their volunteering for charities compared to 3 years ago. Now, the majority, 47%, have kept it the same, but you can see the green have increased it. A third have increased that. And that might have come as well from the fact that we couldn't really volunteer during those seasons of lockdown and the pandemic. And so that role of community, engaging, serving, giving back is really key. And also, as you would expect, because they're starting from sort of a lower base, we are seeing a greater percentage increase in Gen Z. So I would say the summary is baby boomers and older generations more consistent volunteers, but we're seeing an increase in younger people because they have started from that sort of lower base, if that makes sense. So we're definitely, I think, keen to understand, and I think every organisation should be keen to understand your unique donor base, what motivates your donors, and the importance of engaging with them. And the third kind of takeaway is to adopt a disruptor mindset. And this is kind of leaning on what we've seen over time where the hotel industry, the taxi and the evolving towards Uber, and even the banking industry where there's been disruptors come in, have changed it up, have thought of new ways to do things. And so understanding that is really key, and thinking about how you might be able to think differently to engage new generations is really important. This quote that I pulled from our report says, "Disruption is coming to the charity sector. There's a shift away from charity to cause. Growth in advocacy and giving patterns are being redefined by the emerging generations." And what we see with even younger people's giving is that they're giving to a wider range of organisations. They're not as loyal to one or two charities. They're giving sporadically when the need arises, what we call opportunity givers as well. So how you can maximise, that life stage and build trust with that younger generation as they move into older life stages where loyalty and sort of more consistent giving and volunteering becomes more common, I think is really important. And leaning on the visual and the digital and the social aspects of volunteers today, I love this quote. I think it's so important from Seth Godin, who said, "Marketing is no longer about the stuff you make, but about the stories that you tell." And so being able to tell the story of the work that your organisation does, of the cause you support, how people can engage and volunteer across those different generations, I think is going to be really important to engaging and working with different generations in that context. As I mentioned, if you're interested in delving further into any of the insights I've shared today, we have this kind of infographic summary of the charity sector. I've presented a few of those insights, but also kind of zoomed out on the generational lens as well. So if you're interested, we hope that that's a helpful resource for you. It's a free infographic. It's that visual representation of a lot of data and numbers. And so we hope that is helpful for you. But in terms of my final two slides, I'd love to just, challenge you with the idea that we have different generations that are coming through and they are operating differently. And I think part of the need that we have before us is to firstly understand what differentiates generations and understand and appreciate the difference. But there's also something to be said for understanding what unites generations. At the end of the day, we're all human beings, and there are intrinsic human needs that both baby boomers and Gen Z possess around wanting to serve, wanting to connect with a cause you believe in, all of us wanting to work and volunteer in places where we feel safe and accepted and belong, and part of the community. And I think that third component is also really important around leading with empathy and being able to go, okay, well, younger people, why are they behaving this way when it comes to volunteering? Why are they behaving this way when it comes to engaging with not-for-profits? And so understanding that's really key. And I think those first 2 points are a little bit paradoxical. And I love a paradox. I love the tension of it and the beauty of something that might be two things at the same time. And I think my final slide, the quote that I love to end almost every presentation I deliver on, is this quote that kind of wrestles, that every person, I think every leader and company has to wrestle with around honouring legacy and honouring the past and working out your organisation's vision and values and what doesn't change, but also wrestling and kind of thinking about, well, what does need to change and where can we innovate, because change is around us and change is coming and shaping the future. And it's kind of summed up in one final quote, which says, "The strength of an organisation comes from its stories and traditions, but the future of an organisation rests in its relevance and innovation." I think great leaders and great charities have to navigate that tension constantly around what are we not changing, what's non-negotiable, what do we think is timeless and will be relevant in the future, but where can we tweak? And maybe it's a small thing, adjusting a strategy or a marketing piece or a communication piece to engage with future generations to remain relevant amidst all the change that we are experiencing. So thank you so much for listening and your attention today. It was a pleasure to be with you. Thanks very much. Sure. Yes.
We might have time for one question. I don't want to get too far behind again today. Just while you're thinking, and if you do have a question, put your hand up, and we'll get a microphone to you. But I've got so many. But if we've got multi-generations in our organisation, what is the best way to communicate with them in 2025? Is it email? Is it Slack? Is it Teams? Is it text? Is it Messenger? Is it a notice board? Mm-hmm. It's a real struggle for people, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we do find that each generation has their platform of choice, even social media-wise. You know, you speak to young people and they're like, oh, Facebook's for my parents. I don't go on Facebook. And parents are like, TikTok's not for me. It's absolutely not it. I think WhatsApp is one that I think does transcend across the generations in terms of engaging with your team that way. But whatever the platform is, I think the communication piece around this is where you can expect to receive our updates, our communication, being clear on that, is probably the most important, whatever that choice is. But yes, if you can tailor it across the generations and have your messaging go across those different platforms to reach as many generations as possible, that is helpful. But in terms of internally, I think just working out keeping it simple and then communicating that is probably the way to go.
Good advice. All right, are there any questions in the room, or do we have any online? No, you know what? People have just taken photos of all the slides that they like.
Information overload.
That's what we do in 2025. Yeah, that's how Riz we are. That's probably not even the right word. Okay, Ashley, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Slay Queen. Now, see, apparently guys can't say that to women, though. That's what I've been told. Like, it's only from women to women. Okay, most enjoyable. Thank you very much for your presentation. Speaking as a, old white man. Okay. So now to a presentation on legal tips for managing volunteers. Managing volunteers effectively requires understanding key legal considerations to protect both the organisation and the volunteers. By proactively addressing legal considerations, you can create a safe, structured and legally compliant volunteer program that benefits both volunteers and the communities that you serve. So it's my pleasure to introduce Alice Husband to deliver this presentation. She's a Brisbane-based lawyer at Justice Connect's not-for-profit law. Alice was admitted to practice as a solicitor in 2015. She worked in employment law and not-for-profit law at a law firm in Brisbane before joining Justice Connect in 2021. She has experience advising charities and not-for-profits about governance, corporate structure, charity registration, tax concessions, contract law, workplace law, mergers, and regulatory compliance. In her current role, she provides legal advice and training to a range of community organisations. Jot your questions down as we go. There will be an opportunity for questions at the end, but for now, please welcome Alice Husband.
Furniture rearranging. The clicker, has that?
Yeah, just here.
Excellent.
Big green button.
Fantastic. Okay, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I really loved that presentation by Ashley. It's so wonderful to be at conferences and learn new ideas and have those brain cells stimulated. I want to start by acknowledging that we're here on Yagara and Turrbal country in this beautiful spot by the river. I pay my respects to elders past and present and any Aboriginal people that might be here today and acknowledge that sovereignty over these lands was never ceded. So yes, thank you for that introduction to myself. It's always funny to hear about yourself, but I am a lawyer. I've been working in the charity space for the better part of the last decade. And I'm here today to introduce you to our not-for-profit law program at Justice Connect and give you some tips for managing volunteers in your organisation. So I'll just start with some... that green button. I'll start with some information about our organisation. If you've not come across Justice Connect not-for-profit law before, I'm really excited to introduce you to our service. So we are a specialised legal program of Justice Connect, which is a legal charity and an accredited community legal centre. And we exist to provide help to charities, not-for-profits and social enterprises. And we do that in quite a few different ways. So first of all, we have an amazing website that has over 300 free fact sheets, apps, checklists and other tools to help guide you through complex legal topics in plain language. And we have a range of volunteering resources. I pulled the stats and last year they were viewed over 15,000 times. So they're well-loved resources that are used by the sector. I encourage you to check them out. We also give advice to eligible not-for-profit organisations, including about volunteer-related issues. For more complex matters, we can refer community groups to pro bono law firms who provide free advice. We advocate for changes to the laws that affect not-for-profits and charities, and we run a certified social enterprise that provides easy-to-understand training, and all the profits that we make through our social enterprise get reinvested back into providing all of these free services that you see here. So, today, what I'm here to do is give you a taste of 3 key legal issues that we think you should know about if you're managing volunteers in your organisations. Now, we do run a 3-hour training program on managing volunteers and the law, so I wouldn't attempt to try and fit all of that information into this presentation. That really would be death by PowerPoint. I just want to give you a taste of those 3 key legal issues, send you away with some tips to put into practice, and importantly, show you where you can find more support after today if you've got questions that you want answered. I do want to acknowledge that we're here on the back of another extreme weather event in Queensland. I know that would have affected many of you personally, and also the organisations that you work for. I did prepare this presentation before Cyclone Alfred, so it's not particularly tailored to a disaster context, but I did just want to make 2 points. First of all is that we think that if volunteer-involving organisations can set their foundations in calmer times, make sure they understand what their legal obligations are, and put in place some really strong processes, then that sets you up well for emergency situations. And the second point I'd make is that we've recently launched a brand new disaster legal toolkit. It's available on our website for free. It's been designed for not-for-profit organisations, and it includes some free resources about managing volunteers in times of natural disaster. So I'll show you where you can find that at the end of the presentation. Now, I wouldn't be a lawyer if I didn't give you a couple of disclaimers. So my first disclaimer is that I'll be talking about the laws that apply in Queensland today, but our volunteer resources on our website are national, which is helpful if your organisation operates interstate. And second of all, I'm giving legal information today and not legal advice. Okay. So our first legal tip for today is to make the relationship with your volunteers clear. And to set the scene, I'm going to start with a case study. So this involves Min, who is a long-standing volunteer at our fictional Queensland-based Blissfield Community Centre. For many years, she's facilitated the centre's English conversation programs 2 mornings a week. Min is beloved by centre staff, volunteers, and community members alike. In recognition of Min's service and to help ease some financial pressures, the centre has started paying her a weekly allowance, which Min uses to cover her travel expenses. Min is due to have some routine surgery which will prevent her from driving for a while. She has asked for her allowance to be paid as sick leave until she can return to her role. So Min's a volunteer, but we can see that the arrangement's starting to get a little bit complicated. If she's getting paid, is she still a volunteer? What exactly is she and is she not entitled to? This is an example of why we think it's really important to be clear about the legal status of your volunteers. Now, as you can see on this slide here, we have a number of different kinds of workers that will engage with your organisation or perform work for your organisation. All the way on the right-hand side, we have our independent contractors or consultants. They sit outside of your organisation and provide discrete services or work for your organisation. In red, we have our employees, and as you can see, there's multiple different types of employees that you can have working within an organisation. In orange, we have our sort of hybrid volunteer categories: mutual obligation volunteering, court-ordered volunteering, things like that. We won't really be talking about that today. What I'll be focusing on is that green category, our traditional volunteers. These are people who formally volunteer for your organisation. They might be sort of regularly rostered on or have regular commitments to your organisation. In blue, we have our members of the public and our spontaneous volunteers. So spontaneous volunteers are the people who might be coming to volunteer for your organisation in a natural disaster. So our our toolkit on natural disasters goes into more information about some of the risks associated with spontaneous volunteering and what you can do to prepare for spontaneous volunteers to manage some of those risks. Now, from a legal perspective, each of these different categories of workers or people has a different legal definition. And generally, in most cases, it's not enough just to give someone a label. You need to make sure that the person truly has the characteristics of that worker. So in our fictional scenario, we have Min, who's been engaged by Blissfield Community Centre as a volunteer, but the centre has started giving her some benefits that look a little bit like the benefits that you'd normally see given to that red category of workers, our employees. And this really highlights why it's important to be clear about whether someone's a volunteer or an employee, because the law treats volunteers and employees really quite differently in a number of different areas. The first and most obvious area is entitlements to things like payment, to leave, to superannuation, to notice of termination, all of those kinds of things that employees are entitled to, but volunteers aren't legally entitled to. We also have let's say that Min is receiving government benefits. If she starts receiving an allowance, will that affect her government benefits? Might she be cut off from them? Another way in which volunteers and employees can be treated differently. The law does treat employees and volunteers quite differently when it comes to safety and the circumstances in which your organisation could be liable for an action of a volunteer. We call that vicarious liability. And this is different from the way the law treats employees. And actually there are extra protections for volunteers, recognising the special role that they play in our communities. Insurance is another area where employees and volunteers are treated differently. There are many common insurance policies that actually exclude coverage for volunteers, so it's important to know who you've got in your workforce to make sure you've got the right insurance coverage. And then finally, intellectual property. So let's say Min develops some resources for the conversation classes. Who owns those? If she's a volunteer or if she's an employee, the answer could be different because, again, the law treats employees and volunteers differently. So let's get to definitions. This is the bit that lawyers love. So we have Volunteering Australia's definition on the slide. It's time willingly given for the common good and without financial gain. We really like that definition. For a little bit more detail, we also really like the definition from the Fair Work Ombudsman. They've scoured all the relevant cases and they've drawn out these 3 key points. The first is that the parties did not intend to create a legally binding employment relationship. The second is that the volunteer is under no obligation to attend the workplace or even perform the work. And finally, the volunteer doesn't expect to be paid. So this really is an arrangement of goodwill. It's not legally binding and either party can actually walk away at any time. So to help make the relationship really clear, we recommend having a volunteer agreement with your volunteers. You can see our sample volunteer agreement on our slide. This is a free resource that you can download from our website. It's a non-binding agreement, but it sets out the arrangement between the organisation and the volunteer and is a really good exercise in setting expectations and really giving a shape to what the relationship is. It's often really good accompanied by a role description, which again outlines the boundaries of what the volunteer is authorised to do in their role. So in this situation, it would probably be pretty useful for Blissfield Community Centre to have a volunteer agreement with Min, just to set expectations from the beginning as to what she is and isn't entitled to in her role. But importantly, it's not enough to just have an agreement, you need to stick to it in practice and make sure that that agreement actually reflects the legal definition of what volunteering is. So that leads us to our 3 tips for making the relationship clear. First of all, understand that legal definition of what makes someone a volunteer and what makes them different from an employee, for example. Our second tip is to have a volunteer agreement and make sure it's used consistently and kept up to date. And finally, walk the talk. Again, it's if your volunteers have the label of a volunteer, but they're treated differently in practice, you run the risk that the court could look at that arrangement and find that it's actually an employment arrangement or something different. So that leads us to our next tip, which is to think broadly about safety. So as I said, one of the things that we do as lawyers in not-for-profit law is provide training to community organisations on volunteer safety and the law. And in that training, we have a brainstorming activity where we ask our volunteer managers to list some of the risks that they worry about in their volunteer programs. And we get common types of responses, such as volunteers lifting heavy boxes of donated goods and injuring themselves, volunteers who perhaps drive a lot in their role, having car accidents, or community gardens who are worried about people being bitten by snakes or tripping over in the garden. So all really legitimate risks, but you'll notice they're all risks to physical safety. And we are living in a world where people are, whether you're an employee or a volunteer, where people are more and more likely to sustain an injury to their mental health while they're at work. So this is also an area of law that we've seen developing quite a bit, both in Queensland and across the rest of the country. And consequently, it's an area of law that a lot of community organisations are interested. So just a brief recap on what an organisation's duty of care is. Now, this is going to be very brief. As I said, we do run a 3-hour course on this. There's a lot we could get into, but I'll just draw out a few key points. The first is that your duty of care comes from 2 key pieces of law. The first is negligence law. Negligence law is an area of law developed by courts and judges and built up over time. It's partly written down into state-based legislation. The other key area of law we have is work health and safety law. Again, state-based law. This is almost like a codification of negligence law, but for the workplace context. And there's a particular state-based regulators that are responsible for enforcing this law. Now, there's a lot on this slide. This is a slide comparing what the duty of care is under each different piece of law. For today's purposes, I just want to draw out 2 points. First of all is that negligence laws apply to all not-for-profit organisations. Work health and safety laws apply to some not-for-profit organisations, namely not-for-profits that are conducting a business or undertaking. Essentially, any not-for-profit that has at least one paid employee will be covered by work health and safety laws. So your completely volunteer-run organisations might not be covered by WHS laws, but they'll still be caught by that general negligence law. The second point I want to make is about the nature of the duty of care that's owed under these laws. The duty of care is not to be perfect. The duty is to understand what are the foreseeable risks of harm in our workplace and what are some of the reasonable steps we can take to try and manage those risks. Now, there have been a lot of recent changes to work health and safety laws across the country and specifically to the regulations in Queensland. And these changes are drawing attention to organisations' duties to protect mental health at work. These changes, organisations have always had a duty to protect, to manage risks to physical safety and mental health, but it's now more explicit in the law. And it makes it clear that organisations do need to take steps to manage these risks in the same way that you need to take steps to manage risks to physical safety. So what is a psychosocial hazard? It's anything that could cause psychological harm and also physical harm from the design or management of work, the working environment, and workplace interactions or behaviour. WorkSafe Queensland has a really excellent website with more information about different types of hazards and control measures that you can put in place to address them. But let's look at another scenario involving our fictional community centre to try and put this into practice a bit. So we have Denise. Denise is the volunteer coordinator of Blissfield Community Centre's food pantry. Denise coordinates donations and supervises volunteers during opening hours. Community demand for the pantry is at an all-time high with the cost of living crisis. Some clients have become distressed and occasionally aggressive. Denise has always been an enthusiastic and chatty person, but recently she's become moody and short-tempered with the other volunteers. Last night, Denise packed groceries for a vulnerable community member, and after hearing her story, she was in tears for the rest of the evening. So Denise is obviously under a bit of pressure here, but I thought what we could do is try and tease out some specific psychological or psychosocial hazards that she's facing. So here are some of the examples of psychosocial hazards that you might find in your workplace. I think when it comes to Denise's situation, the ones that stand out to me are her high workload and her job demands, especially for a volunteer role. Exposure to traumatic events or material, if she's regularly interacting with people and hearing their stories and that's affecting her. And of course, violence and aggression, if that's coming up more and more as a challenge for her in the pantry. And there are obviously others on that slide that you'll see and that might resonate with you, particular risks for your organisation and your volunteers. Now, these are hazards that we can't avoid completely. They come up in many cases just as a feature of working together in an organisation. But what we do know is that repeated or long-term exposure to these kinds of hazards creates stress, and that stress has secondary consequences, whether it's physical harm or psychological. So what these new regulations are saying is that we do need to take reasonable steps to identify these hazards in our workplace and manage them to try and minimise that risk for our staff and volunteers. Now, just before I leave this slide, I do want to highlight that you'll see one of the psychosocial hazards is sexual harassment. And there have been recent changes to the law in Queensland in relation to this. In particular, from the 1st of March, so this is law now, there's a requirement under work health and safety laws for organisations to have a written plan to prevent sexual harassment. And again, the regulator has some useful resources there, even a template plan that you can go away and use, some FAQs, fact sheets and other information. So how can organisations like yours and Blissfield Community Centre manage these psychosocial hazards in the workplace? Well, this is a simple framework for managing risk, and it's the same framework that you'd use for managing physical risks. So the first step is to spot or identify the risks that are in your workplace. We've done that specifically for Denise's role, but in your organisations you should be looking globally at the psychosocial hazards that are in play in your volunteering environment. And I was just speaking to someone outside who said they have 9,000 volunteers in their organisation, so that might involve, for the larger organisations, looking at many different volunteer programs and contexts. There is a link here for a government-approved tool to help larger organisations do a psychosocial risk assessment. For that tool, you need at least 20 people to fill out the survey, but some of the supporting resources will be useful also for smaller organisations. So that's all about identifying risks. The next step is to assess those risks. So really we're looking at how likely is it that this risk will occur, and if it did eventuate, how serious could the consequences be? And that will help you to identify, I guess, the most pressing and urgent risks that you need to address first, and that can help you prioritise your work. The next step is to fix or control the risks, so identifying what control measures you could put in place to minimise each of those risks from occurring. So in Blissfield Community Centre's context here with Denise, one of the hazards she's experiencing is high job demands, a high workload. So the centre could think about perhaps reassessing her role description and working out if it's actually appropriate for a volunteer position, maybe reassigning some duties, or perhaps even just rotating duties between a number of different people, making sure she's getting proper supervision and opportunities to debrief and talk about what's happening in the pantry, and making sure she gets regular breaks. So some examples of how you could address that particular hazard. And of course, the final step is to evaluate and update your risk management plans. Particularly when it comes to psychosocial hazards, it's good to make sure that the measures that you're taking are actually working. If they're not working, then you might need to go back to a plan B and try some other approaches. So our tips when it comes to safety is, first of all, to use a variety of tools to help identify the psychosocial hazards in your volunteer programs. So some of the tools you could use are obviously just consulting, just talking to your volunteers about what's happening in their roles, in their programs. You can use anonymous surveys. You can observe the workplace and people's behaviour. You can review your records. Are there particular topics that volunteers seem to be complaining about? Are we having high absences? If you have exit interviews with your volunteers, you can look at those as well to identify some trends or some issues that you might need to address. Our second tip is to develop a sexual harassment prevention plan. As I mentioned, this is now law in Queensland for organisations. And thirdly, to demonstrate good management and leadership. I mean, that's important in addressing all kinds of safety risks, but I think particularly important for cultivating a mentally safe culture in the workplace. And really every interaction that a manager or a leader has with their volunteers and their staff is an opportunity to build on that culture. Okay, that brings us to our final tip, which is to end the relationship well. I know that the idea of firing a volunteer makes lots of managers a bit uncomfortable, and we understand why. It's really tied into this gratitude that we have for our volunteers and the really unique and important contribution they play to our organisations. For many of us, we actually couldn't do the work that we do without them. But there will be times where it is necessary to bring a volunteer relationship to an end. Perhaps it's no longer safe for the volunteer to continue in their role. I know I was volunteering in a kitchen and I was approaching the end of my pregnancy, and it wouldn't have been safe for me to continue doing that role for physical reasons. You might have ended a particular program and so the volunteer's role is no longer needed, or you might be facing some performance or misconduct behaviour issues by a volunteer that you're required to address. And so that's why this is our last tip here. Our final scenario involves Bob. He's a volunteer bus driver for the Seniors Social Connection program at Blissfield Community Centre. He's been a valued volunteer for the past 7 years. Last week, the centre received a complaint from a passenger who says Bob threw a chocolate bar at her, resulting in a skin tear on her arm. The centre knows it has a duty of care to its passengers and decides to end the volunteer relationship with Bob. It sends Bob a letter terminating his volunteer position immediately. As Bob is a volunteer and not an employee, the letter says there is no right of appeal. So this is actually based on a real story that was reported in the news about 10 years ago, where a long-standing bus driver was sacked after a similar complaint was made about him. It featured in a broader ABC report about how many volunteers feel as though they're sort of second-class citizens in organisations and aren't treated as fairly as employees are. And so I guess that leads us to our point that even though volunteers don't have the same legal rights as employees in the workplace, in many situations there are really good reasons to provide volunteers with a fair process, particularly when you're looking to end the relationship. Of course, that's not only good for the volunteer, but it's contributing to that workplace culture that you want in your organisations and making sure that you still have that really good reputation in your community. So what should Blissfield Community Centre have done? Here are some best practice tips for ending a volunteer relationship. First of all, conduct a fair investigation to try and get to the bottom of what really happened on the bus with the chocolate bar. If you find that if the centre finds that Bob did throw the chocolate bar, think about the variety of options that are available to sort of handle that conduct. Is terminating his position proportionate or the best response that the centre could come up with? If the centre decides, yes, it does need to end his position as a volunteer, we suggest being aware of other relationships that the volunteer might have within your organisation. This is kind of unique to the not-for-profit centre, where you might have volunteers who are actually also members of your organisation. And by that I mean people who signed up to become a member, they come along to your AGMs, they vote at your AGMs and so forth. So be really clear about which relationship you're trying to end, because there's different process for ending a volunteer relationship as to removing someone as a member from your organisation. Next, beware of victimisation. So that's not so much present in this scenario with Bob, but this is about being aware of complaints that your volunteers have made about their work or the organisation, and making sure that ending their relationship is in no way a retaliation for that complaint. Our next tip is to confirm the end of the relationship in writing. This just makes sure it's absolutely clear to everyone what decision has been made, and it's clear that Bob is no longer a representative of the organisation when he's out there in the world. Respect privacy and confidentiality. So if Bob's shared some personal details during the course of the investigation, that's not fodder for gossip, that's kept confidential. Make sure Bob returns his property, his bus keys, his uniforms, and consider security. So that might include physical access to premises, or it could also include passwords. And we unfortunately do hear of cases of volunteers who are removed from organisations that still have all the Facebook passwords and go on to create a bit of trouble. So our tips for ending the relationship well are to review inappropriate behaviour early. Sometimes a quick conversation to remind volunteers of the standards you expect and perhaps the policies that you have can be a way of bringing a volunteer back on track. But either way, inaction isn't an option. As we've seen, organisations do have that duty of care both to the volunteer and the other people that they're interacting with. Before ending the volunteer relationships, check for other statuses, check whether a person might also be a member of your organisation, for example, and take care of victimisation. And finally, confirm the end of the relationship in writing. For liability reasons, it's important to know whether a person is a volunteer of your organisation or if they are a member of the public. So that's just a taster of our 3 key legal issues that we think you should know about if you're managing volunteers. I know that you'll have more questions, and we should have time to answer a couple of them, but first I'll just show you where you can get more information on our website. So all of the legal issues we've talked about, you can find out more on our website. We've got the wonderful national volunteer resources, which I'll show you in a second. And don't forget that we can also provide free legal advice to organisations that meet our eligibility criteria. So this is the landing page for our volunteer resources. From this page you can find our National Volunteer Guide. You can find our free sample volunteer agreement and role description. And we also have a great resource on managing youth volunteers, which might be relevant for any of you who've watched Ashley's presentation and are thinking about how you can involve younger volunteers in your organisation. So that's what our National Volunteer Guide looks like. We also have an app available from our website, or a tool. This helps guide you through some of the decisions that you need to make when you are engaging volunteers. So I guess all the way through the life cycle, from recruitment to engagement, managing performance and so on. And then we have our natural disaster legal toolkit. So this is a specific resource for not-for-profits, and it, as you can see, this is the free page on managing spontaneous volunteers. So do check it out, and we're really keen to hear any feedback you have on that toolkit. Okay, so we also run training and webinars, and our not-for-profit law service is partly supported through that social enterprise. So we charge a fee for our webinars and for our tailored legal training. You can find out more about the different training topics that we offer for community organisations. We do have training on volunteering. It ranges all the way from 1.5-hour workshops to interactive 3-hour sessions on managing volunteers, and for the really keen beans we have full-day workshops that go into more detail on the legal issues that you might come up against in managing volunteers. We're also speaking with Volunteering Queensland about bringing some training to you later in the year, so stay tuned for more information about that. You can get in touch with us directly as well if you're interested in getting some training for your organisation. We run lunchtime webinars. These are shorter webinars over lunchtime on a Thursday. The next one that we have coming up next week is on top tips for drafting a volunteer agreement. Might be useful if you've yet to embed one in your organisation, or if you think it might be time for a refresh. And then again in May, we have a webinar on fostering diversity in volunteering. So thank you very much for supporting the sector and our organisation by perhaps signing up for some of those webinars. And thank you very much for listening today. I know not everyone's idea of a fun 45 minutes is listening to information about the law, but we tried to keep it relatively a high level, and if you do want more information, our service is here to help you. Okay, I've got some time, 5 minutes for questions if anyone has a question about any of those issues.
Alice, I'll kick you with one offline.
Yes.
Online, sorry.
Yeah.
How can organisations best balance legally protecting their volunteers and the organisation themselves with minimising the red tape barrier to volunteering?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think that's feedback that we hear a lot, is that, you know, if we hand volunteers a bunch of paperwork, it's just going to turn them away or put them off volunteering for us. But there are lots of different ways that you can put in place things like volunteer agreements and role descriptions. I've certainly volunteered for organisations that instead of handing you a volunteer agreement, it's an electronic document that you read through and click to accept. So doing things in that way are a way that you can protect your organisation and also make it just a little bit easier for your volunteers to digest and agree to. Sure.
Sweet. It's just Daniel here from the AFL. Just a quick question.
Yep.
You spoke about the ending of relationships for volunteers
Yes.
there. So we've had some instances where clubs have put in there the letter, call it, saying no right to appeal. However, their constitution actually stipulates differently. So does the constitution override that letter? And do you have any recommendations for that?
So this is really where it's important to know what's this person's role in our organisation? Are they a volunteer? Are they also a member? And in what capacity are we trying to end their relationship? So, a volunteer, let's say they're a volunteer coach or something. Sorry if that's not quite relevant, but if you want to end that particular role, that is different from ending their role as a member. So certainly it's the constitution that will contain the proper process for removing a member, and usually that does contain quite a lot of procedural requirements to give a person notice, to provide procedural fairness, and sometimes the member will have a right of appeal if they're removed as a member. But you might have a situation where you want to terminate the volunteer relationship, so you do that with your letter saying we're ending the volunteer relationship, but you actually think it's okay if you remain a member of the organisation, and so we'll leave that relationship in situ. Does that make sense? Thanks.
Hi, I've got a question around hours. It's actually in two parts. The first one is just a yes and no question from you. Does the Disaster Legal Toolkit have a section around fatigue management and how we can manage the long hours that our volunteers will be required for a long period of time? And then the second question is there, I guess, a limit of how many, and separate to just disaster relief, this is just general volunteering, is there a legal limit or just a limit in which volunteers can volunteer in terms of hours each week, each fortnight, each month, or is it endless? I just want to know what the actual sort of, I guess, maximum is per week. Or
I might deal with the second question first because that's freshest in my mind. I think that's a safety question. So in the absence of having an award or an enterprise agreement, so these are the instruments that would cover the entitlements of your employees, in the absence of that, you're really falling back on your safety laws. So we have a duty of care to our volunteers to protect their physical and mental health. So what are the limits that we want to set around the number of hours that a volunteer can volunteer in order to protect those or to safeguard their safety? So I think that's the lens that I would be looking at that issue from. The first issue is about fatigue in volunteering in natural disaster contexts. Look, I'm not sure if there's a specific section in the resources that talks to that point, but I think again it's a safety issue. One of the things that our resources look at is developing a plan for what your organisation will do in a natural disaster context. And so certainly if you're thinking in advance about what some of the risks could be in managing our volunteers in times of natural disasters, and you identify that fatigue is one of them, then that's something that you can address as part of a normal risk management process, and include some guidance in the emergency plan for your organisation. Yes.
Hi. Thank you very much for coming, and much appreciated. So I've got a question. I'm involved with an organisation that has multiple not-for-profit organisations affiliated to us across the state sporting, so Pony Club Queensland. Recently I've been rather disturbed to discover that whilst they're holding electronic meetings, they're not record keeping.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very concerned as to where this will leave them should something evolve, so they're not keeping records of correspondence or other things that they're dealing with via electronic meetings and not recording that I know of.
So I'm going to direct you to some of the resources on our website. So we have some resources on record keeping for incorporated associations, assuming that that's how your organisations are structured. So that's all about what the legal obligations are when it comes to keeping records. The other resources that we have on disputes. So you might not be in a dispute situation just yet, but those resources are about what rights do members have to raise questions or take action when they think something's not going well.
Yeah, that's where my concern lies. If there's, and there are disputes, people are people. So yeah, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, have a look at the resources. They might point you in the right direction.
Thank you very much.
Maybe one more. Sure.
Hi, I'm Michelle from a Queensland Health Hospital, just one. We have, our situation is unique. Our volunteers can't do the work of a paid worker. Unions get involved, it's chaos. Someone said to me at one point, it is Queensland labour laws, they cannot do that task. Now, is that correct? Are there labour laws that say that volunteers in a government tax-funded institution cannot do that? Because I'd love something in black and white instead of people saying, Michelle said no. Do you know what I mean? It's unions, volleys, it's complex.
Yeah. I don't know if I can answer that question on the spot. Sorry, it might be the kind of thing that requires a bit of research into the nature of the work that the volunteer's doing and the types of laws that apply. So yeah, sorry,
no,
I can't answer that right now.
That's all right. Thank you.
Have we got one more?
All right, let's do one. And just while we're getting that mic there, are there resources for volunteers themselves? Because you've talked a lot about resources for volunteer managers. What about the volunteer side of that?
Well, our organisation exists to help not-for-profits as an organisation, so that's the audience that we're speaking to with our resources. But I think volunteers can still read them and learn more about what the laws are that apply to their situation, and perhaps learn a bit more about what their entitlements are as volunteers, because sometimes there's a lot of information out there about what rights people have as employees. It's often less clear where to find information if you're a volunteer. So yeah, the resources aren't written for volunteers, they're written for organisations, but there's certainly a lot you could learn by reading them.
Great. Let's take one final question. Where's the mic?
Thanks. It's from me, sorry. I'm just reflecting back on the various presentations we've had in the past couple of days and trying to look at a model that's a bit more flexible and adaptable and collaborative. And I wonder how feasible it would be for a group of organisations to get together to develop a singular volunteer agreement, so sits beside that volunteer passport, the rosterfly kind of concept, where you have a volunteer agreement that could be a collaborative agreement, so a volunteer is enabled to be flexible in who they volunteer for and what they do. Just thought I'd put that out there.
That's definitely food for thought, thank you. Yeah, that's got my brain firing off on who would be the parties to the agreement, how could you enforce it? But no, I think that's really interesting, thank you, because we're always looking for ways that we can use the law to make things easier and more practical. So I don't know if I can answer that right now, but it will give me something to think about. Thank you. Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Please thank Alex. Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, we've got a 30-minute session before lunch, but before I introduce Bridgette, if you would like to, and if you're able to, if you would just like to stand for a minute and just, wriggle, stretch. Oh. Okay. Let's push through. We've got half an hour to lunch. And this is going to be a really good session. Wow, the joy that I just granted you looking at your faces, just standing up for a minute. Okay, so we are on time today, which is terrific. Lunch will be at 1:05. Bridgette has a flight immediately after that, so we're good. So this is a presentation on increasing your impact through corporate volunteering. You're going to learn how volunteer-involving organisations can create meaningful corporate volunteering opportunities to extend your impact. Our guest speaker is Bridgette Muller. She's from RACQ Group. She's a born and bred North Queenslander. She's passionate about helping Queensland vulnerable communities recover after natural disasters and build resilience for future events. Bridgette established RACQ Foundation's Community Assistance Volunteering Program, which has delivered 25 projects across the state, with more than 600 skilled and non-skilled volunteers pledging 34,000 volunteering hours. That program won, many of you will know, Volunteering Queensland's Corporate Volunteering Award back in 2020. Please welcome Bridgette.
Thank you so much. The clicker. Thank you for having me. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the lands that we meet today, the Yagara and Tugara people, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So, this is me at age 2, and I'm really great to hear we've got another pony clubber in the room. This is my first pony, Boo Boo, and I was a very keen horse rider, and I did join the Alligator Creek Pony Club, and don't you love the logo? And they still have the logo today. But my time at the Pony Club was really great, and I loved to horse ride. But what I really learned was volunteering. We were based just outside of Townsville, and we'd often be hit by cyclones. We'd all have to come together, clean up the yards, and get ready for gymkhanas. So that really instilled a sense of community and volunteer spirit that's still with me today. And yeah, fortunate enough to be managing volunteers in my role now. So over 14 years, I've been in management with volunteers, and while paperwork and legal information is really important, I feel that it's really about the people, and that's what really makes the tangible difference. We'll talk a bit later about our program and the amazing volunteering hours and machinery that's been repaired, but what it really comes down to is the people. So the community assistance program that we established has been running for 9 years, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. But before I do, I have a quiz for you. So, all of you know of us as RACQ, but who knows how we got the R? It's royal, but yes. So our volunteering is in RACQ's DNA. During the war, we were a lot smaller as an organisation with a lot less money, but we had cars and we had members. So we actually put our hands up to volunteer to repatriate soldiers from the warships to the hospitals and to their family homes. So during that time from 1915 to 1921, our club transferred over 28,000 soldiers and returned veterans. So that's a relationship and a part of our history that we're really proud of, and we still have a great relationship with the Anzac Day Parade in Brisbane. Our volunteers drive the buggies for the veterans that are no longer able to march in the war, so that's a really great initiative. Some of you may have heard about this. This was Children's Day, RACQ's Children's Day, which was established in 1910. Again, we had cars and members, and our membership base would go and collect disadvantaged children from orphanages and from the hospitals. They would take them in their vehicles to Sandgate for a day at the beach and to have a picnic. And back in 1910, to get an automobile was a very cool thing. So it was a hit, and it almost lasted 50 years, that program itself. So you know a bit about our history now with volunteering and how RACQ Foundation came about was post the Brisbane flood. So as you're aware, it was a devastating flood. There were a lot of displaced members and displaced people of the community. Some of them had insurance, others were not insured for flood, and clubs, not-for-profits and community organisations were really low on the priority list to get funding. So RACQ saw a gap and we decided to fill it, and we set up the foundation. We wanted to support the heart of the communities through our grants program, which was focused on recovery. Now we open to resilience as well. And since 2011, we have provided over $15 million to 500 organisations around Queensland. Okay, so over the next 5 years, after we'd set up the grants program, we were predominantly focused on cyclones and floods. In 2016, Queensland faced a devastating drought, and it did go on for many years. Our board acknowledged that drought was a disaster, and we opened a grant eligibility round for drought. Anyone from the bush, and I'm sure there might be some people on the online right now, they can be quite stoic, and we really thought everyone will apply for the drought funding that we had available, but it turns out that they didn't, and so we took a proactive approach, and we connected with a few not-for-profits that were doing work and really great work on the ground. One of them was Farm Angels, previously Drought Angels. They're an organisation we're really proud to have had a relationship with since 2015. And they were doing some great work on the ground. We funded them, and then we thought, right, we should get boots on the ground too, so we can connect with community, have a conversation, and then share the information about the grant. We had the cars, we had the tools, we had the mechanics, and we headed out west to Longreach to support farmers that were impacted by drought. So this is our first project in 2016.
So we're entering our 5th loss of a wet season. So our last substantial summer rain was in December 2011, and after that we've missed every wet season. So we've gone from running 3,000 cattle to 150.
Basically write you off as far as income goes for quite a few years. You sell all your genetics and basically you're probably about 10 years before you get back to where you start. It's like losing your job, and in any other game you just lose everything really.
And I still have the rates, the phone, the electricity and all those things to go. So just to get these cars going here, it's wonderful.
It makes you realise how dry it is out here, how tough the people are doing it. You can see that they appreciate it,
I was asked if I wanted to go and I didn't even hesitate. By bringing our own vehicles, we brought our own equipment, and that's been a plus to us.
It's an adventure, and the opportunity to come out here and help has been great.
Most of the work that they wanted us to do, most of us got through it fairly quickly. It's been servicing, replacing fan belts on things.
Well, when we got here this morning, we were busy on the Land Cruiser. It was full service. The other one is a nice old girl, an old TE20 tractor outside with hydraulic problems, and we fixed that. A bit of nostalgia.
It's been tremendous really. It's been humbling really that people would take your time to do it.
It's what it's all about, working together, helping each other, learning from each other.
So I'd like to thank the RACQ Foundation. It seems so little just to say thank you, and I thanked them so much.
And we're hugely grateful for what you have done. It's made a huge difference. So I'd just like to thank the RACQ Foundation.
We'll stick with it and try and see our way through it, and then we will. Everyone will see their way through. It'll be just a bit steady, but it'll happen.
So over the last 9 years, we have developed our program out a lot. In 2017, we started to introduce office staff and non-skilled volunteers to provide support. In 19, we responded to the North Queensland weather event in Townsville and Julia Creek in that western area, and we leveraged our relationships through our insurance division to get tradies to volunteer with us. So we have skilled, plumbers, electricians, builders that now come out on the program with us. In 22, we embarked on our first First Nations project, which we delivered in Yarrabah. At RACQ, we're really passionate about reconciliation, and we have a great board director called Wally Tallis, and may or may not be related to Gordon Tallis, but is a legend in his own right, and he really supported that shift to working in First Nations communities, and that's been a really important part for us as an organisation to learn about truth telling and really the history of what actually occurred. So we're now at the moment leveraging our relationships with partnerships and other partners to kind of add value to the programs that we create in co-creating these types of initiatives that is always community-led. And we're really focusing now on resilience projects. With the foundation, we see resilience as social resilience, nature-based resilience, and also built resilience. So I'll share a video of a most recent trip, which was in the Torres Strait last year.
Kapugiga nguzunel el sisiriat ngai kula apasen ngalpun kayaugat ke amatakeda ngalpun kuikumabegal ke sizing apa kulai ina kaib gigenu aina ngapa wagel ngai ngat nitamon aiwal manin kimeso ukapalamin ngalpun nurpun buai. My name is Elsie Siriat, and I am a descendant from the Kula Kula clan of the Kararak Nation. As we stand here today on the land of the Kararak Aboriginal Nation, we say welcome, welcome to country. Thank you.
Here at Frog Gully, we're working with a large team of volunteers to re-establish the community gardens so that the local community of Thursday Island have access to fresh produce all year round, and especially in the face of increasing natural disasters, where the supply chains for produce that they might get to the island get cut off. So hopefully we can help the community become a little bit more resilient, and in those times of disaster, have access to the things that they need.
We're at Horn Island. We're setting up an aquaponics centre. It's basically to build a sustainable food source for the local community. Such a beautiful place, just walking around, beautiful people, beautiful communities. Everyone's on island time, which is the best thing. And everyone kind of gives you the thumbs up or a wave when you're going through the communities, and it's just rewarding.
We're about 1,000 kilometres away from Cairns, which means we're reliant on our fruit and vegetables and our food supplies to be barged up to us on a weekly basis. There are also extra pressures with cost of living, so Council sees these projects as really important to try and help communities ease that pressure and to come together at the community gardens and be able to share that community space. So very important projects for us.
We've been really lucky. We are teaching on Thursday Island, Hammond Island, and back over in Bamagar, we're teaching students from prep through to year 12. We're teaching students about pedestrian safety, passenger safety, bike safety, and we're even touching on a little bit of boating safety. We aren't just for city kids, we are for all Queenslanders, so it's really important that we get to those far corners of our state. We know having a licence opens up doors, opportunities for work, opportunities for further education, and we believe that's really important. And we want to provide them with the tools and strategies that are going to help keep them safe when they are out there on our roads.
We're committed to our Reconciliation Action Plan and establishing and developing stronger relationships with First Nations communities. This has been an opportunity for us to not only visit this wonderful location and community, but also to give back and to learn about the culture.
Torres Strait Islander people are very strong people and very proud people. It's a beautiful part of the world. It's tucked away, pristine waters, the coral reefs. Most of the area is untouched. The beauty is in how the people, they connect with the ocean, the waters, the sea, the land. There's a reason why we still do things in a certain way because of the values that we still continue to carry inside.
Our purpose is to make a positive difference in the lives of Queenslanders, and we shouldn't do that from a distance. We should do that in community, up close, helping with what they need a hand with, and then also building those close relationships and connections as well that hopefully form friendships and last long into the future.
From our community, we want to say in our language, so from the bottom of our hearts, we say thank you to the RACQ Foundation and the work they've done.
RACQ Foundation, thank you for bringing that Blue Army. It has been fantastic. It's been a great week. We've been able to see the community gardens just transform before our eyes. Mina big eso. That's broken English in our language to say a very big thank you.
We've been welcomed with open arms and we're really privileged to have had that opportunity. We came as strangers and we're living as friends, and it's very humbling.
We must continue to breathe on the embers, the wisdom of the elders, and to keep that fire burning.
I'm glad you like that one. So volunteering at RACQ is in our DNA, and it does start from the very top. So meet David Carter and Leona Murphy. They're real advocates for volunteering at RACQ. Our programs are generally a week long, and they allow staff to be released from their jobs, paid as normal, to go out and represent RACQ in the communities, and the volunteers donate their weekend time. And in fact, the executive team do also take time off work and go out and work alongside, and we don't give them the really easy jobs either. Albert, you would have seen earlier, Albert is our little legend. He worked for RACQ for almost 40 years, or just over. He was an integral part in establishing the Community Assistance Program, and he's also was one of the founding organisers for the Variety Bash. Albert still volunteers with us today. He's actually just got back from Ingham doing some relief work up there with us, and he's attended almost all of the 25 projects. So we do love Albert. This is Amanda. Amanda worked at RACQ in a retail branch. She volunteered at our Texas QLD project in 22. And at RACQ, we talk about the yellow truck feeling. So it's what you kind of think a patrol would feel when they rocks up in the yellow car and, fixes, a damsel in distress getting the car back on the road, and we kind of describe that as like the yellow truck feeling. It's a real sense of purpose and giving back and feeling proud to be working at RACQ. Amanda had that yellow truck feeling, and we're really proud that she is now a coordinator coordinating the projects that she once attended, and she's in our team. I'll now share a little video clip of Teresa, who was in our learning and development team, on her experience being a volunteer on our programs.
The rural community, we don't shine the light on that enough, and I just think that the RACQ Foundation does a great job of that. One of my older brothers used to run cattle out at Gingy. I know how hard it can get out here, and I just think, every little bit helps. When my manager asked me if I wanted to come, I jumped at the chance. It makes me feel very proud that we've been able to do it for them. And even though it is little jobs, and a few times we've just said, well, we just painted or we just fixed this up, when we're leaving and them saying to us how grateful they are, really gets you in the ticker and makes you feel very proud. I'm very proud for working for RACQ, I always have been, but this makes me even prouder. I would love to do it again, 100%.
So let's talk about the stats. As you can see on the screen, there are some pretty impressive numbers up there. We've been from everywhere, from Cairns to Cunnamulla and everywhere in between. The learnings for us doing this corporate program, this is our main volunteering program. While we do support, really great charitable organisations like Fair Share, doing one-day volunteering, this is the stats for exclusively just the Community Assistance Project. At RACQ, we see this as a reward and recognition for our staff. A lot of people volunteer, and unfortunately not everyone can join the trip, so it is a reward tool. It's also an opportunity to share learnings, as we mentioned earlier. We are Queensland's largest club, and we don't want to be just for South East Queensland, although we do like it here. So it gives us that ability to kind of go get out to the regions as well. The importance of partnerships has really been able to, amplify the impact that we're making. Last year, we were in Wudjil for 2 weeks after the flood event up there, and were able to work alongside some training, a training program with the locals there, and leveraging our relationships with previous First Nations programs and Cherbourg. So that has really made a difference. We've started, commenced our impact measurement survey process, so we're really excited that we're going to get some baseline data for that. And I would also like to just do a shameless plug. In addition to the volunteering program, we've just announced a special grant funding round in response to Alfred and also the North Queensland floods. So so you can apply for equipment, capital works, technology services, or human services, wellbeing programs. With the funding and eligibility, so you can apply for up to 25,000 or 500 in extreme circumstances. We're wanting to support charities who are supporting the recovery efforts, incorporated clubs, sporting clubs, and not-for-profits. So the applications do close on the 28th of February. We have an amazing team that you can call, and if you'd like to know any questions, please reach out to me. I'm happy to share my number with you if you've got some ideas. Pardon? 28th of April. Did I say February? I don't know what month it is. Yes, 28th, the 28th of April. Yes, thank you. So I would just like to finish on saying that while I was presenting corporate volunteering, we are actually not a corporate, we're a mutual, and we are Queensland's largest club with 1.7 million members. So as we aren't a corporate, any profits that are made, we put back into community. So a huge shout out to all of the members online and here for enabling the delivery of our programs. Your membership has funded all of the work we have done. And thank you for keeping the little girl from Alligator Creek Pony Club in a job that I love so much.
We've probably got time for a question, if there are any questions in the room. I've got one of my own, but if you, just make yourself known to the microphones, which are on either side of the room or online. So I wonder if you might just give us a piece of advice on, so we're a volunteer-involved organisation and we want to approach a corporate or mutual to maybe get involved, to get their staff involved volunteering. How do you approach that to convince the corporate? Like, so what, considering what you get out of being involved, how do we start that relationship with a company, whatever company it might be?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really important to be proactive, and obviously with your networks and you know a lot of people in your areas. Most organisations do have their strategic ecosystems on their websites, so you can kind of identify what organisations are kind of working in your fields. And I would really recommend to just pick up the phone and have a conversation and set a meeting up. It's always best that people come out to site or have the opportunity to see what you do, so it makes a bigger impact rather than really fancy presentations. In my opinion, yeah.
Great, that's great. Thanks. Are there any questions in the room? Otherwise, we'll wrap up. Okay. Cool. Thank you very much. That was brilliant. You were great. Thank you. There's a gift here for you in red. Thank you, Bridgette. Now, we're about to go to lunch, but before we do, two things. One, we've allowed a bit of extra time for lunch today, good news, so we'll start back here at 1:45. But before we go to lunch, Jane Hedges has a quick announcement. Hedges, sorry.
That's all right. Just very quickly, we wanted to recognise Volunteering Queensland has a continuing professional development program for those organisations that are members of us and for volunteer managers there, and they can engage in a professional leader of volunteers certification. So that means over a 12-month period they undertake to do a certain amount of professional development, to attend seminars, to be involved and to work actively on their volunteer management and volunteer leadership. And the 2024 alumni, and we've got the lovely list of our 2024 alumni up there, and I would like to ask, because I think in the room we have Andy Parkinson. Can I get you to stand, please, if you're here? Andy Parkinson. Woo. Emily Wilson, Carla Bovell, Nikki Young, Nicole Ashley, Shane Harris and Vicky Meyer. Can you give them all a big round of applause? And these amazing volunteer managers get to put PLV after their name, so Professional Leader of Volunteers. So if you want to add some letters to your signature block, we are calling for people to join the 2025 leadership program there. So I think that closes at the end of this month, Susie. So get in, either hop online and you can fill out the form, or contact Susie, our membership manager. But we would love some more people to be involved in that. We think it's a great program. It's also a great network to help you as well. So please enjoy your lunch and we'll see you shortly.